Hello and welcome to Caged In, the podcast where week by week I go film by film through the career of Nicolas Cage to find out, is he beyond classification? Is he a real gem of an actor who just cannot be described in any unimaginable words? Or is he a crackpot loon that we best forget about and move on with our lives? Each week, I get on a guest and ask them, are they a Nicolas Cage fan? What was their first and which is their favourite Nicolas Cage film? This week's film is Richard Stanley's 2020 sci-fi body horror, Colour Outer Space, and my guest is the fantastic Nick Helm. As with all these episodes, the regular spoiler warnings do apply, so if you haven't seen this film, do check out the handy document in the show notes that will tell you if and where the film is streaming, as well as a couple of disclaimers, one being that both myself and Nick believe H.P. Lovecraft to be an absolute racist piece of shit, and this conversation was recorded pre-Joel Schumacher's death, so if there's any jokes at Joel Schumacher's expense, I believe there may be a couple, nothing too bad anyway, but that is why they are in here. We're not making light of the dead. Neither myself or Nick would dare do such a thing, and I think both of us are fans of Joel Schumacher's work. We're just not fans of a certain film he made with Nicolas Cage, and I'll let you find out which film that is as you listen to the podcast. One last thing before I let you go is that you have until the 12th of February. Yes, that is next Friday, the day that Willy's Wonderland is released, to order your Not the Beast Caged In t-shirt. They're up for pre-order. It's a pretty small limited run, but I really want to provide something cool for you guys. Do go over to the socials, that's Caged In Pod on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, to check out photos of what that design will look like. And it's an amazing design by an artist called Tim Sinclair, and I'm sure if you've seen it you'll agree that it's going to be a fantastic t-shirt. But yeah, do be sure to head on over to cagedinpodcast.limitedrun.com to pre-order your Not the Bees t-shirt now. With all of that out of the way, there's one last thing left to do, and that's to get raging with Cage. I'm here to look at the hallucinogenic sci-fi body horror Colour Outer Space, based on the H.P. Lovecraft short story. Nic Cage plays Nathan Gardner. When a strange meteor lands in his garden, things start to get trippy. Time and space bend, and then things get really weird. They always say when taking hallucinogens that you should have a spotter. So to make sense of this trip, I'm joined by actor, comedian, writer, musician, and one-man megamyth, Nick Helm. How are you today, Nick?
All right, that's me, that is. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. All things considering, my brain's a bit frazzled from watching this film, and has some weird parallel to what's going on kind of in the world of a family who can't leave their home as fear of what is outside and this kind of unseen terror.
Yeah, I mean, because I've been living on my own. So I didn't even. I'm more like Tommy Chong. Yeah, it was. I mean, I watched it last night. You watched it last night too, right?
Yes.
Is that the first time you'd seen it?
Yes, 100%. Like I like to go in with a fresh brain, just kind of give me the weirdness.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, okay. So your podcast is basically, it's a Nicolas Cage appreciation podcast, right?
Well, yeah, it kind of started off just to the fact that it's a fascination with the fact that as an actor with like a 40-year career, he's got over like 100 movies, and kind of people of his generation, and obviously he's become this kind of mythic figure in his like acting style, and like kind of it's become a meme essentially. And like, first of all, I started off like,
I was going to say, yeah,
just as like the social science aspect of it, of like what makes him such like an interesting character as a person, as an actor, But then, like, over time, I've kind of softened and I've become a massive fan. I wasn't always like, it's always like trying to, I don't know, pitch this to people. I kind of can come across like some weird anorak. Do you know what I mean? And unless people kind of listen to the podcast or know me, they kind of like, like when approaching like yourself on Twitter, you probably think like, who's this fucking weird guy? Do you know what I mean? Like, who's
no, I think he's a weird one because he's had about 8 different careers as well. In terms of sort of like his evolution as an actor, it's kind of he's sort of like Madonna in that he's sort of reinvented himself over and over again. But like, I'm just looking at his IMDb, and I'm like on the first screen, and Mom and Dad is on there from 2017, which I think is quite recent, you know. And then when you actually look at how much he's done since then,
yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's kind of crazy. It's crazy if you put like Mum and Dad at the beginning of at the bottom of the screen, depending on how big your screen is. He's done like 15 projects since then, and he just, I mean, I don't know. I went through a period of being sort of indifferent to Nicolas Cage, and then I liked Nicolas Cage.
Well,
around about The Rock.
Well, let's get into a few questions I always ask at the beginning of these, which is, obviously you said you've had an indifference period, but are you now a Nicolas Cage fan?
Well, yeah. So I didn't really know. It's weird because one of my not one of my earliest memories, but I remember I went to see Moonstruck when I was way too young. So my mum wanted to go and see Moonstruck. I must have been 5 or 6. And the only thing I really remember about Moonstruck is there was an advert for Police Academy 5 beforehand.
Perfect.
And I was like, why aren't we watching that? Why aren't we watching Police Academy 5? And we watched, so I remember, I mean, Moonstruck was so advanced for me. So my mum took me and my sister to see Moonstruck. I think my mum. So I sort of like, I kind of knew who Nicolas Cage was from that, and then he made kind of like, he was like an actor, wasn't he? He made like gritty crime movies. Like he was like a proper actor for a while, and then it was such a left field thing when he started making, The Rock.
That mid-90s stretch is like kind of, and it's hit after hit. Like,
well, him and Travolta sort of like took it in turns, didn't they? And then he did The Rock. Travolta did Broken Arrow. They both did Face Off, and then they kind of like they had like a load of hits together. But like Con Air, and then I really hated him for a while because I hated National Treasure. And then he made sort of like a bunch of films that I found quite lazy and annoying. Oh. And I really hated the National Treasure films. And then what happened? Oh, I went to, so this is, okay, so this is where I am now in Nicolas Cage, right? So in about 2011 or 2012, right, I'd just done the Edinburgh Festival. And as a treat, what did happen? So we went to the Edinburgh Festival. My parents own this tiny little cottage in Brittany, right? Mm-hmm. And me and my girlfriend at the time went to just sort of chill out in this cottage in the middle of nowhere because we thought like a week of board games and burning stuff on the fire would be kind of like just what we needed. It turned out like 4 days into it, we were bored out of our minds. So we got into a car and we drove to Disneyland Paris, right?
Amazing.
From Brittany, which is sort of like that's a long drive. That's like maybe a 15-hour drive, and we got to Paris. And we went there, and it was September, so the schools were back, and there weren't any kids around, and so you could just go on rides all day, like over and over and over again.
Amazing.
And I went on Space Mountain, anywhere, because I've told this story a few times, so it's sort of fluctuated over the years. But anywhere between 7 times in a row and 12 times in a row, right? I went on Space Mountain, and my girlfriend was just like, if we sit at the back, you really get whipped around, right? And I was like, okay, so we sat at the back. But I've got quite a long body, right? I'm 6 foot, but I've got like the legs of like a 5'5" guy, and the body.
I have the exact same problem. Yeah, I'm massively disproportionate.
I think I say I'm a long body, which means that it's fine, right? I'm 6 foot, but when you get into the harnesses that you get on roller coasters and stuff, it means that your body is slightly too long for them. And so when I was clamping down, I had to sort of like get into sort of like a weird position in order to sort of like fit into the actual harness. So I was at a weird angle. Anyway, I did it 7 or 8 times. Came back from France, didn't really think much of it, and then she was just about to go to Australia for 2 weeks, and my family were in France, and I was going to be on my own. And we were watching just before. It's like a farewell movie. We were watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre in bed, and at the beginning of the film, I was fine. By the end of it, I was crunched up like a prawn at the bottom of the bed, right? And I was in absolute agony. And she lived on like the 3rd floor of this big house, and so we had to go down. And I couldn't stand upright. I couldn't move. And I had to go down all the floors, and then I had to be like helped into the car. We drove to the emergency unit about 1 o'clock in the morning. It took them about 2 hours to see me. When they saw me, they said that I had torticollis, which is sort of like this muscle spasm thing. And they gave me a load of tramadol, and they said, if you take that, you should be all right in 2 weeks. And then my girlfriend dropped me off on the doorstep and then drove to the airport. And I was on my own for 2 weeks. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't wash. I couldn't go to the toilet the whole thing was just like, it was fucking awful, right? And the only thing I had tramadol and access to Amazon. And I started buying Nicolas Cage films.
Amazing.
For some reason.
Fantastic.
I hated him because I wasn't a fan, right? So I don't know what got me into what made me start doing it, but I bought like Season of the Witch, Bad Lieutenant, Vampire's Kiss. There were some others, right? And so I'm watching these Nicolas Cage films, and I'm in absolute agony all the time, except for when I take this tramadol, and then there's like this couple of hour window when you're in the middle where everything is you're just chilled out. It's sort of slightly hallucinogenic, and you're watching these Nicolas Cage films, and you just go, these are fucking brilliant. These are the best films I have ever seen. Especially something like Season of the Witch, where it's so historically inaccurate on it's the Salem witch. It's the Salem witch trials. They're in the Crusades, and they travel from one side of the world to the other side, and like him and Ron Perlman. So they're coming back from the Crusades during the Salem witch trials, and then the Black Death starts, and it's just kind of like that's like 3 historic things that happen in your film, in an hour and a half film, that all took place 200 years apart from each other.
Well, that film as well specifically has got this. It's got the like buddy cop aspect of like Nicolas Cage and Ron Perlman's characters. It's like it doesn't know what film it wants to be, and like straight away. It's
a buddy cop film where they're transporting their prisoner from one side of the country to the other. But the prisoner's a witch, and they're medieval knights.
I remember being like taken out of that film within like the first 30 seconds when you see Ron Perlman's like perfectly barbered haircut, and I was like, right, like that. And I think the opening line is like, whoever kills the least amount of guys is buying the drinks tonight, like a couple of ruddy bloody blokes, like, do you know what I mean, at football.
Yeah. But one of the things I really liked about that was Phil, because like he was wearing a fucking wig in that film, isn't he? And,
no, I think that's his hair.
No, it's not his hair, because on the DVD it's not, because it's a famous Nic Cage wig, and it's one of the reasons why I started actually really respecting him, which was that that on the DVD extras when he's being interviewed, he's in full costume, but he's not wearing the wig, right?
Amazing.
And you go, oh, it's a decision. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not like Sean Connery, where he's wearing a hairpiece and they're trying to convince you all the way through the 60s that James Bond isn't bald. It's like, it's literally Nicolas Cage is going, he's got like thinning hair, receding hairline, and he's going, what sort of hair would my character have? And he's like going, right, we're not limited with my limitations, right? Let's create this character from the hair down, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he does. And it's kind of like, and then I was just like, oh, it's a decision. It's not just a vanity thing where he's trying to, because if he's doing interviews for the DVD extras without his wig, he obviously doesn't care about that stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's all about the character. And there you go, well, so all of a sudden it's interesting, you know?
Well, that's one of the things I found from doing this podcast is a lot of the stuff he does, like there is a stage in his career where it's real bottom of the barrel. Do you know what I mean? You can walk into any Asda and you'll see a lot of these DVDs free for $5. Like, but he does interesting stuff with the roles that he gets. Like, even if the film is terrible, like one I covered recently was Stolen, which, like, you look at the cover, it looks terrible, but then
is that Nicole Kidman?
No, that's Trespass. That is a big steaming pile of shit. That's directed.
Awful.
Yeah, again, it has all of the elements to be a great film because Nicole Kidman, Nicolas Cage, what's his name, Ben Mendelsohn. But then that film falls down on it has no twist. Well, the twist in it.
Who directed that one?
Joel Schumacher directed Trespass.
Fuck off, did he?
Yeah.
I've seen it. Fuck off. Fucking hell. But that is, but he did Trespass, and then that is sandwiched. I mean, that's a shit sandwich. He did Trespass, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, and Stolen. And it's kind of like, I mean, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance isn't good, but I mean, it's better. I don't know, that's weird, isn't it? It was a real bad part. So the other film that I saw when I was on Tramadol was Drive Angry.
Amazing. What did you make of Drive Angry?
I loved it. I loved and there was Sorcerer's Apprentice as well. And of course he was in Kick-Ass. Yeah, but, I mean, he's done so many fucking, oh my God, he's done so many, oh my God. What a weird career. Can we just go through his career? I know you've done this like every single week, but can we just go through it? When I really got into it, so before he did The Rock, he did Leaving Las Vegas, which was his big Oscar. And he was like, he's a proper actor. But before he did that, he did Kiss of Death, which I vaguely remember being at the cinema, but I was too young to see it. And then he did, what was the one I saw? I saw Amos and Andrew on a Plane, which is him and Samuel L. Jackson in this sort of race relations comedy.
Yeah, which I'm not sure. I'm not like, having watched that a couple of years ago was quite eggy then. I don't know how that holds up in regards to race relations now as well.
I watched it on a plane. Do you know what I mean? It was like it was back in the early 90s. I watched it on a plane where you only had one screen between the entire plane, and you all had to watch it or not watch it. We had that, and we had Groundhog Day. And I just remember thinking Groundhog Day was the best film I'd ever seen. And Amos and Andrew was fucking awful. He did that just before Red Rock West. Red Rock West was one of my favourite films growing up. Loved it.
I think that's like a really underrated, like, just crime thriller that nobody talks about, especially of like the 90s. Like, I hold that up. I'm a massive David Lynch fan, and so it's got Lara Flynn Boyle from Twin Peaks in it, and is it Dennis Hopper? Yeah. Dennis.
JT Walsh or is it Emmett Walsh? I think it's JT Walsh.
Yeah, it's Red Rock West.
JT Walsh. Yeah, it's such a good film. It's like a proper like crime noir. I always remember the bit of acting that I like the most because his knees all bust up and he's looking for work. And there's this bit when he goes in to a garage at the beginning and there's money that's left unsupervised. And he has this bit, which I guess is overacting in a way, where you're sort of really signposting your thought process. But he looks at the money and he sort of rubs his hands and then he strokes his mouth like, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And then he walks away and you go, so it's obviously, it's sort of like he's signposting what he's thinking. I just remember that being like excellent acting when I was younger. Loved it. But then he did, then he did Guarding Tess, which was awful. It Could Happen to You, fine. Trapped in Paradise, one of the worst Christmas films I've ever seen. Hate that film. But then he did Trapped in Paradise. That was 3 films before he did The Rock. And then The Rock was just fucking bonkers. It's just like, how have you made that film?
I think the tipping point for his career was maybe a like 1-2 punch, perhaps, of Wild at Heart and then Leaving Las Vegas, kind of like getting the art house on side with Wild at Heart and then kind of getting the critics, the chin strokers to really pay attention with Leaving Las Vegas. And obviously that opened up the doors to that. Like, just if you look at like, from Leaving Las Vegas, the run of films up until that point, like The Rock, Con Air, Face Off, City of Angels, Snake Eyes, 8mm, Bringing Out the Dead, and then Gone in 60 Seconds.
60 Seconds, though. Gone in 60 Seconds was huge, I don't think I've ever seen Gone in 60 Seconds.
It's weirdly directed by the same director of Season of the Witch.
Really? Well, that's not that weird, is it?
Well,
that's like
a weird thing about like Season of the Witch and Trespass. They were both the last films for both directors. Neither of them have like directed anything since, so their careers have been put on hold since 2012. So like it's very like
no.
So obviously we've done a nice little run through of Nicolas Cage's career, picking out some highlights, but what is your favorite Nic Cage movie?
Con Air.
What is it about Con Air that I totally agree with you, it's a fantastic film, but what is it that speaks to you, as it were?
Well, I would maybe say, now that we're talking about it, Red Rock West, and I would also say it's not my favourite, but Vampire's Kiss, I think is brilliant as a satire. I think that you can watch it as a companion piece to American Psycho. It's almost the same film. The fact that people like the guy is an arsehole. Right? He's playing an arsehole. And so he acts like he's an arsehole. He overacts. He acts like he's a melodramatic dickhead, right? That's the character that he's done. It's not bad performance from Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is presenting that character as if he's an unlikable douchebag. And that's exactly what you get in the film. And then you get people that have either not seen the film or they've just seen clips of him in the film. And just assume that, and I would say that's probably where most of the criticism is coming from, is people that haven't even bothered to watch the film, and they're just putting it down to like a sizzle reel of Nicolas Cage overacting in Vampire's Kiss. He's great in that film.
Well, there's a very specific YouTube clip called Nicolas Cage Loses His Shit, which is
I've seen that.
Which is like heavily involves Vampire's Kiss, which like from researching that movie, the stuff he did on set, like for it, really got into character. So when he eats the cockroach, he actually did that. He was an arsehole to like the cast members. He had this really weird request that he had to have yogurt on his toes during a sex scene because apparently that's what got his character off. And like I think it's that thing of being an arsehole and just like, what's a ludicrous demand I can make? Do you know what I mean? Like, what can I do to just like really test the patience of the crew and like push this to the next level, and it's bizarre.
Well, I don't necessarily condone being a prick on set. I have worked with those people, and it is difficult. But what I would say is that I think it's always pinpointed as one of his worst, along with Wicker Man. But I would say that Vampire's Kiss is a really underrated, misunderstood film.
Oh, 100%.
And, probably not as good as American Psycho, but it's almost the same film, just done 12 years before it.
Yeah.
So maybe it was ahead of its time. But it's like American Psycho was about the 80s, and Vampire's Kiss was made in the 80s. So maybe that's the difference.
That's another. Yeah, I was gonna say that's another Nicolas Cage film that, like, from that, like, the writer had written After Hours, the Martin Scorsese film, wrote Vampire's Kiss, and then has kind of like drifted into obscurity since. Robert Bierman, the director, ended up just kind of directing a lot of like Holby City and The Bill. Like, he's a British director, kind of again like drifted off into minor obscurity, as it were. And it's kind of like that film. There's a really good Insider article that like kind of breaks down like the troubles that film had and kind of the weird legacy. And it, like, very much like you said, it is that thing that it was ahead of its time. It's only now that people are either taking the piss out of it, judging it having not seen it, or people going, it is great. It is that kind of proto-American Psycho, like you said, which is a point I've been trying to make for years.
But what I would also say is I was on Tramadol when I watched it.
No.
So...
Like, don't worry, you've got a second opinion from somebody who has watched it a handful of times, and I'm backing you up here. But it's good that you bring up Vampire's Kiss, because that brings us like perfectly into Color Out of Space, because you could argue like that is Richard Stanley, the director of this. That's his favorite Nicolas Cage film, and
is it?
He asked it. Yeah, it's this and Panos Cosmatos, who directed Mandy. I'm not sure if you've seen that. Like,
yeah, so Mandy, yeah.
Both of those directors have cited Vampire's Kiss as their favourite like Nicolas Cage movies, and you can kind of see that from the performances he gives in both of these. Like, especially if they were kind of notes he got, or he had some kind of knowledge to the fact that they were their favourite. And in this Color Out of Space, you get the resurgence of that voice he does in Vampire's Kiss.
He sort of keeps slipping into this sort of Californian sort of twang thing. Yeah, it's it's a bit jarring in Color Out of Space, but I really liked. I was just really happy watching it because I feel like, you know, there's stuff like USS Indianapolis. I feel like the Humanity Bureau. I mean, yeah, Pay the Ghost. He sort of like made Left Behind. Fuck me. Oh my God. Have you done that one yet? Have you done that?
Yeah, I spoke to Carl Donnelly about that one.
Fuck me, Left Behind. What a fucking... And the worst thing is it's got Leah Thompson in it. And you just think, oh, come on. We've waited how many years to get her back on screen, and then all of a sudden she just made fucking Left Behind. What an insane fucking film. What was anyone thinking? Well, it's like Nicolas Cage doesn't even put in a performance. He's just sort of like there for the money, you know?
My theory is for that, because his brother is a priest. Like, one of Nicolas Cage's brothers is a priest, and he's cited in interviews that he did it as a favour to his brother because he really liked the book. But it's almost like he has this kind of fear of upsetting the Christian crowd. So he's like, I'm not going to do my usual spiel. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to go crazy with it. I don't know. It's like a cardboard cutout of a man in that film.
Yeah, the only thing that's really noteworthy of that film is the fact that it got made. Aside from that, it's a really boring film. It's boring. It looks cheap. It's boring. Nicolas Cage puts in the least Nicolas Cage-like performance of all time. Yeah, it's sort of an unforgivable film, really.
Well, that
wasted everyone's time.
A thing that really sticks out to me about Left Behind is the score, because it kind of like just sounds like this library music, kind of like picking all this like unlicensed music. Do you know what I mean? Like you've kind of someone's trying to make
right?
Yeah. It's like the Getty images of music basically, and the Getty images of films. Like it's very televisual. It's kind of, I don't know, it gets going and then just finishes. It's not really got anything. It's got some of the worst acting I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, and that plane looks so cheap. The set that they're in just looks awful. Well, and I know there's meant to be like layers to it where all of the passengers are meant to represent a different deadly sin and all of that. It's just shit though. And, yeah, really bad. So it's kind of like when you get to something like the 1-2 punch, as you say, of something like Mandy and then Colour Out of Space. It's like, I don't think that he looks at his career the way that we look at his career, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think people with Mandy were like, oh, finally, Nicolas Cage goes full Nicolas Cage. And I don't think he thinks about himself in terms of like, I'm going to go full Nicolas Cage in that film. That'd be a ridiculous way to think about yourself. I just think that he's finally sort of like picked a deep... I think that a lot of his decisions have been financial decisions as opposed to...
100%. But like, as we've seen from Mandy and Colour Out of Space in recent years, if you roll the dice enough times, you will cash out with some gold. Do you know what I mean? And both of them as well, like released by Spectre Vision, which is a company owned by Elijah Wood, like which is like, yeah.
Well, he made that film with Elijah Wood, didn't he?
The Trust. Yeah.
That's right. That was good.
Yeah. So
so he made The Trust. Then he made Mandy. Well, I mean, he made loads of films in between. Then he made Mandy, and then Richard Stanley was trying to get Colour of Space made with them. And then they said, what about Nicolas Cage? And then Nicolas Cage was already into H.P. Lovecraft. And then that's how they got together on that. It feels like, because of the visuals as well, because it's and the colours that they use, it feels sort of like a spiritual sequel as well, in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Very reliant on kind of like this, I don't know, like bright neon, like day, like just really up, I don't know, at times quite upsetting colour palette. Do you know what I mean? Like just arresting and just like aggressive. Like the kind of like use of these bright, it's like a magenta and like pink, isn't it? The kind of colour palette for this.
It's magenta. And so basically because I've done a little bit of reading since, because it's such a fucking crazy film but it's not, do you know what? I say it's crazy. I think Mandy is crazy in a kind of like, oh my God, they're really doing this. You know, I would say Colour of Space is sort of crazy in quite a restrained way. And it's also, I mean, I'm just thinking about some of the stuff now. Now I realise I might be talking bollocks. I thought the pacing was really slow.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily the most exciting film to watch as you're watching it, but then when there are moments, it's sort of I mean, there are some really horrifying moments in this film that I think have affected me more than a lot of films I've seen in recent years. And but the colour magenta is because it's meant to be like this alien colour that no one is familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicolas Cage even says at some point, "Oh, I don't know what colour it is," and you're there and you're thinking, you'd just say purple, wouldn't you? If you're a bit, if you know, yeah. it was a purple sort of light, but it's not. It's magenta, and it's the only colour that doesn't show up on any natural colour slide.
Yes,
that we have on Earth. So it's sort of like a man-made colour that doesn't really exist in nature anywhere, and that's why they picked it as this alien colour, because it's not a natural colour.
Look at this.
All those years in the big city, we finally got out. We're living the dream.
Maybe It is a dream.
Then everything just blew up. Big flash, like a pink light. Or actually, I don't even know what color it was. It wasn't like any color I'd ever seen before.
Looks like a meteorite. You think it's radioactive? I mean, it's from space, right? Meteorites are generally no more dangerous than ordinary rocks.
How can something that big just disappear? Did you plant those?
No.
Ward, you come here for a sec.
Oh, God.
What are you doing? Shh. It's talking to me. Who's talking to you? A man in the well.
It's in the static, it's in the moisture. It's in here, it's out there. And what's out there is in here now.
Everything's under control.
Why are you so in denial? That thing from the meteorite changes everything around it.
It's just a color. But it burns.
Do you believe me now?
I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything's going to be A-okay.
There's a really interesting line in the H.P. Lovecraft short story where, like, to me, it felt a bit like sloppy writing, where it's just like, oh, it's a colour that's undescribable. And it's like, I think like that's the direct quote. It's like, it just feels like you've got a word count like HP and you've gone, we'll just say it's undescribable instead of like wasted. Like, because he's a man who doesn't waste a lot of time on kind of descriptions. It's kind of a lot of plot with H.P. Lovecraft. Do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of see it in like his books have never had like a romantic through line. They've never had kind of like, he's not about that. He's not about like big descriptions or like character backgrounds. He's just let's hit the ground running and just go with the story.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's almost like fact-based writing.
Yes.
You know, he'll say that there's a farm in the woods. It's got 2 buildings, but he won't say what the buildings look like.
No.
What the forest looks like. You know, it will kind of like, but he'll say sort of like that the forest is haunted, and there's a guy that lives on the outskirts of the forest, but he's the only guy that, you know, and it's so he gives you details with one hand, but he doesn't give you them with the other.
Yeah.
So I think he's quite interesting. He'll like say that there's a family, but he won't tell you what their jobs were, or you know, he doesn't go into any detail. And I thought, like, because obviously there's quite a few like modern elements to the film. I went and because it's based on a Lovecraft short story, and I haven't read the short story before. So I just looked it up, and it's sort of like they've got it on YouTube where you can just listen to it, and it's like an hour and I think it's an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. You know, there's different versions. I listened to like the hour and 20-minute one, and it's a really good companion piece. You know, because you just think you get to the end of the film and you're kind of like, how have they what's going on? You know? And there's all the stuff about in the film. There's all the stuff about the daughter being into witchcraft, and then, and interestingly, like Richard Stanley is really into witchcraft, and he's really a massive stoner.
Well,
so you've got the two older kids. One of them's a stoner, and one of them's into witchcraft. It's sort of like they're both facets of Richard Stanley, but also. They mention witchcraft in the short story, don't they? Where they're kind of like talking about. Well, and so it's almost like he's woven that into the film and sort of fleshed it out a bit.
Well, there's a reference to something that H.P. Lovecraft invented, which is the Necronomicon, like the book of spells that the daughter is reading from, and there's that harrowing scene where she takes a Stanley knife and just kind of carves these runes into her skin and kind of gives this blood sacrifice, and she kind of has this rune on her forehead, which I don't know, nothing is questioned in this film either. People don't really stuff happens. There is a horrific moment when the mother and the youngest son are fused together in this horrific, you look kind of taken back there for a second because you might have remembered it, but it's horrible, right? That scene,
it's absolutely stunning. There's several moments like that in the film. I mean, again, the pacing is really slow, but there's several moments like that in the film where it's horrifying. I mean, are we doing spoilers or not?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. This should be.
I think there's the bit when is it Jolie Richardson?
Yes. Let me double check.
Is it?
Yes, Jolie Richardson. Yes.
So Jolie Richardson. There's the bit when she cuts her fingers off, which is just sort of oh fucking, because she's going to cut herself, but you don't realise she's going to hurt herself that badly.
Yeah.
But that's intercut with this absolutely hilarious sequence with Nicolas Cage looking at himself on TV, going, "Oh no!
Yeah.
Why didn't somebody tell me to comb my hair?" And it's really funny because it's sort of, you think of Nicolas Cage as sort of larger than life and eccentric, and then he's playing a guy that's just got the exact same. He can't stand looking at himself on TV. He's got the same issues that everyone else would have. And it's cut into this scene where Jolie Richardson cuts her fingers off, which is fucking horrific. It's the bit when she gets fused to her son. And all of that is just awful. There's the bit with the Stanley knife, which is horrible. And then there's also, oh my God, there's the bit when he pushes his daughter into the room and says, "Feed mummy." Or go feed your mother, or however he says it. And it's just this absolutely horrific sort of human spider hybrid, but it's horrific. It's horrific. I've seen, you compare it to stuff at its very worst is sort of Dwayne Johnson at the end of The Mummy Returns, right? the angle that they use for it, and at no point do you get one of the great things about this film is that you never really get a satisfying view of what it is that you're looking at. You can see Nicolas Cage scratching all the way through the film, and I kept going, "What's he scratching? Give us a good look at it."
Yeah.
And either they don't give you a close-up, so you can't really see what he's scratching at, or the close-up is so close that it doesn't really give you much of a context of what it is on his body. Do you know? And so I just thought that stuff like that was done really well. But there are moments in it that are just so fucking shocking and horrific that you go, "Oh my God." I thought the llama stuff was quite cute. The special effects and stuff with the llamas. But there are those moments. And while I was watching Colour Out of Space, I immediately wanted to watch In the Mouth of Madness. And then as soon as I started thinking about In the Mouth of Madness, I was thinking, well, it's like Annihilation as well. Mm-hmm. And you could watch Colour Out of Space, Annihilation, Mouth of Madness, and The Thing in one sort of big kind of movie marathon. And you can have a proper fucking horrific, trippy, weird night. And also, it just made me sort of because The Thing is one of my favourite films, and John Carpenter is one of my favourite directors. And I don't have a problem with them remaking The Thing. And in actual fact, because The Thing was a remake of The Thing from Another World, you just think there could be another remake, or there could be a sequel to it.
Yeah.
And if they did do a sequel to The Thing, you could set it on a farm. And if you did set it on a farm, you could put someone like Nicolas Cage in this movie. And in actual fact, Richard Stanley would be a great director to do something like that. So that it wouldn't be like The Thing reboot, remake, sequel thing that they made like 10 years ago. But it would be kind of like a reimagining, the way that John Carpenter reimagined The Thing. You could do like a reimagining of that concept and just stick it somewhere else. And I think that this almost works as sort of that. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think The Thing is very inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, because obviously that thing of these humanoid and kind of, there's a lot of tentacles. I think like, because obviously Cthulhu is the big thing in H.P. Lovecraft mythology, of this kind of tentacle-faced creature from another dimension, and kind of you can see his imprint throughout loads of stuff, whether it's Stephen King, like The Thing, just kind of is seeped into a lot of things, like even in regards to, I don't know, like things like the Loch Ness Monster. Like there's an interesting fact that the Loch Ness Monster it wasn't like talked about until a year after that King Kong came out. So there's this kind of thing that like people, unless something's put into the consciousness of people, then they go, oh, maybe that's a thing. Or like in the 1950s, people started talking about flying saucers, and all of a sudden they were round, and that's after movies had shown it. And then when it came to the 90s, all of a sudden they were triangular, or like how pop culture influences people's like, I don't know, like thought processes of the real world. And then obviously, yeah, H.P. Lovecraft is kind of the godfather of modern horror in a way, like even though he was writing in the died in the mid-30s.
Yeah,
so.
definitely with The Thing and In the Mouth of Madness, which are both John Carpenter. Well, In the Mouth of Madness, until this, I think people widely regarded that as the closest thing you'll get to sort of Lovecraft on film, really. But that's a weird film, because basically it's also a pastiche on Stephen King. So it kind of doesn't really know. It's not really focused. It doesn't really know what it is. All the imagery is Lovecraft, but it's based on sort of like a Stephen King best-selling author. But I guess that's because they were trying to update it and be like, well, who's the modern equivalent of H.P. Lovecraft? Well, it would be someone like a Stephen King, I guess is what they were doing.
Yeah, because
In Madness is great.
They play in that same ballpark, H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King, in the fact that they've created these areas, whether it's kind of Derry or something like that, towns that recur over and over again in their books. And like the setting of Colour Out of Space is a fictional place called Arkham, and this is like set on the outskirts of it, a town that we never really see apart from the mayor's office, where like all I kept thinking, like, that made me laugh about this movie was obviously like you've got this no, I want to say toxologist, but that's what Nic Cage keeps calling him.
What's he, a waterologist? No, what was it?
Ah,
a waterologist? That sounds stupid. It wasn't a mixologist. It was a... Oh, God, what was he?
He is a...
Wasn't a meteorologist. He was a...
Well, he's kind of...
Can you edit it?
No. Well, I can do. If it gets too...
cut this down, do you think? Do you think you'll cut this bit down as we throw shit at a wall and see if we can remember what the phrase was? Hang on, I'm going to write ologist in colour of... Colour... What's it called? Colour Out of Space. Fucking hell. Leave this in. Go on. A day. Colour Out of Space. He is a... Oh no, it doesn't come up. Fucking... Yeah, fuck it. Google has politely removed the word ologist from all of my searches. Okay. I think he was sort of like a waterologist then, shall we say?
Yeah, and like, he's kind of got this whole like B plot of like he's very much coming in like Woody from Toy Story, just going like, somebody's poisoned the water hole. Like that's his whole that's his whole arc, and he's kind of like frantically running about trying to tell people like, oh, there's something in the water, and like.
Well, he's sort of frantically running about, but he's sort of he's established a relationship with the daughter, right? So. Yeah. They're the first characters to meet on screen, right? And then she sort of welcomes them in like a member of the family later on when they're looking at the meteorite. And Nicolas Cage is, what's going on with this? And then at one point, Jolie Richardson accuses her of kind of like not dressing, not having enough clothes on because she's trying to impress the boy. And you go, yeah, sure. And then there's the bit when he knocks on the door and she's been throwing up and she goes, now's not a good time. And he's basically trying to warn everyone that the water is poisoned. Mm-hmm. And he just sort of like half-heartedly stands on the porch and says, oh, well, if you can, try and drink bottled water.
Yeah.
And then and it's kind of like, I think they've established that you know her well enough that you could have gone into the house and helped her if she was ill.
Yeah, yeah. Know? Well, so it's kind of like, go back to that opening scene. It's very bizarre in that, like, when you see that shot of her, I was like, I thought this was set in like modern day, because like the way it's like opened up is you see her in these kind of like Wiccan robes, and she's dressed like this is like kind of 1800s almost, and she's barefoot, and there's this horse, and like one of the things I noticed straight away was like it took a good minute for the horse to move. I was like, wow, that's some fantastic horse acting. Like, I was like, what is going on here in the fact that like this horse is not moving like at all. Like it's just dead still. And I don't know if you picked up on that or whether it's my kind of like nerd brain looking.
You might be the only person that has picked up on that as well, I think, maybe. But that just means makes you that makes you unique, though, doesn't it? So that's a good thing. You can see that's a positive.
Definitely.
I liked the beginning. I thought it reminded me of that of Legend, that Ridley Scott film.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's got this like, the atmosphere of this movie is great, and the fact that it's kind of like it's like a fog machine all the time, just everything, and like the colors of everything, and like the way it's lit is it's. And like you said, it is very much like a spiritual sequel to Mandy, and like this kind of use of color, and just it creates this atmosphere. And on paper, the plot for this is kind of tried and tested and been done in so many movies. Like you can see parallels of this to almost like The Shining, in a kind of like a family isolated, like, and the patriarch going mad. You kind of see a bit of like Poltergeist in this kind of like strange things happening to this family. You've got like tropes that you see in horror all the time of like it's always the youngest kid who happens to like be the first one to kind of get the heebie-jeebies and like figure out what, or like be affected first. Do you know what I mean? Like the child actor as well who plays the youngest son, Jack, Julian Hillard, has like I looked up his career, which is like fascinating. He's only like done like 5 different things, but like it's this, The Haunting of Hill House.
That's what I reminded him from. I remembered him from.
He's going to be in The Conjuring 3. He's in like this weird art house film called Greener Grass, and it's just like he's got a better career than like a lot of actors who have been working like years in just kind of these interesting choices, especially like the fact the poor kid is just put in these horrific situations of just being in these like horror movies like straight out of the gate. Do you know what I mean? Like especially The Haunting of Hill House into this, it's like the performance he gives.
I mean, he was great in that as well. It's really interesting. I'm talking about the way it looks and the way. They filmed it in Portugal.
Oh wow!
So, and it's weird because you don't think it makes much of a difference. But one of the reasons they filmed in Los Angeles in the first place, when the film industry first began, was because the light was really good and the quality of air was really good, and you got a certain quality on film. And you can sort of tell the difference when there's a film that is set in New York and a film that's set in LA, and a film that is set in New York but is filmed in Toronto or somewhere. You can tell the difference, you know. And I think that there's this weird kind of like ethereal quality to the film in color out of space, and I think one of the things that probably definitely adds to that is the fact that they didn't film it in America. You know, it's filmed in Port. I don't know many films that have been filmed in Portugal, if any. I'm sure they've got a film industry, but I haven't seen loads. But I just think that when you add stuff like that, you can tell like when stuff has been filmed in Australia or New Zealand, you know, not just because of, you know, they've got like, you know, Ayers Rock in the background or whatever, you know, but you can tell when stuff has been filmed in certain places because of sometimes the way that the quality of the footage comes across. But yeah, I just thought that it just had this really interesting feel to it all, and the color. I mean, the colors are sort of such an important part to the film. I don't know. I mean, I think we're both being very vague about it, but I think it's because partly it's because we both saw it yesterday.
Yeah, it's a real.
There's a lot to unpack, you know.
And I don't like. It feels like with H.P. Lovecraft as well, everything's set in a world that is kind of like, this is just a slice of like the pie, and it's like I feel like now I need to either do a lot of research onto like where this fits into the mythology, because we get this scene at the end where like the last half hour things just unravel, and it is like an acid trip with a dose of magic mushrooms all at once, like with a bit of like fucking DMT thrown in for good measure, because it just kind of like it goes balls to the wall.
Tommy Chong. I'm Tommy Chong. What are you? Yeah, it's fucking mental. I think it's like the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, are
just fucking crazy, and I don't know. I really like, but I think part of it is the fact that it's fresh, and like you, one of the first things I had to do after I saw it was look up the original story, listen to that. I've done I did a load of research about like how they made the film, and because it's just kind of like, if you want to talk to me about Con Air, I can just talk to you about Con Air. I can talk to you for 3 hours of Con Air without looking up a single thing, right? But this is kind of like, I don't really know where to begin with it, because it is such a weird film. I think the other reason why it's difficult to talk about is because there's basically no story. They managed to plot it out, you know, but you're constantly waiting for things to go off the hook, and then they do eventually in the last 20 minutes. But they drip feed you moments, like when I keep saying like the pacing was really slow. Not a lot happens. They drip feed you these moments, and it's gradually sort of like evolving. You get the impression that you have that one flower by the well, don't you?
Yeah.
And then you have that insect that comes out the well. And then as the film continues, there's more and more flowers, and there's more and more insects. And you get the impression that this is the beginning of a full-on invasion on Earth. And it's just going to happen. It's not going to happen like instantly, but it's going to happen flower by flower, one at a time, until it eventually, and it will take like 1,000,000 years, right? Or it'll take 100,000 years, but eventually those flowers are going to take over the planet. And that's how the invasion is going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
So there's sort of like, there's that sort of concept, which I thought was really interesting. And oddly, they kept talking about how like time is affected and how time slows down.
Well, there's a really interesting moment with that when the daughter is doing the washing up, and there's a shot of the clock, and like it speeds up, like the clock speeds up, and then just stops completely. And then when she opens her eyes again, and the sink's overflowing, there's another shot of the clock, and hours have passed. So she has been stood there for hours, and it's like, and you get it with the sun as well when he goes out to look for the dog, and then he comes back and says, like, all of a sudden it just got dark, and like he's supposed to at one point put the alpacas back. We see him put them back, and then the sister says, like, you were supposed to put the alpacas back, and it's like time is just like jumping all over the place, and it's like, are we seeing, or are they seeing, and like the time before he put the alpacas back, or has, do you know what I mean, has time's walked around them?
I think I definitely need to give it another watch, because I didn't pick up on any of that. I just felt like there was some sort of like, there were references to time slowing down and speeding up. I felt like something had been cut out of the film where I hadn't really picked up on it, but maybe I just need to watch it again, because there's so much going on in it, but at the same time there's not a lot going on. It's basically a family that is sort of falling apart because of this meteorite that lands, and you're sort of waiting for it to get to its very worst.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't give you any answers, and it doesn't give you. It's not. If you're looking for like a satisfying story, it's not really there, other than the fact that it's just this family that implodes. And they start off like being one of the most likable screen film. Nicolas Cage. Okay, we'll go on to Nicolas Cage, right? When it first started, I was like, yes, finally. Really, he's not like Mandy, where he's like batshit crazy. He's playing like a regular guy, and he plays, the first time you see him, he's wearing like jeans and sort of like, in my memory, it's a gilet. And wellies. And he's and he just looks like, it's just like, I doubt he would have even had to go to like the costume department. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of like,
he looks like the type of guy you would see in the background of a Top Gear episode.
Yeah, he looks like any man in a garden centre.
Yeah.
But because it's Nicolas Cage, it sort of like really stands out that you're just like, he's wearing wellies. And then I started thinking, they call them Wellington boots in America because that's based on the Duke of Wellington, right? And so, I started going off on this little tangent. And he just plays this really down-to-earth guy. And what I thought was really funny was Jolie Richardson asks him to go into his wine cellar to get a special, and he goes, "Oh, I know just the wine." His acting, I think, is excellent, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in the first half of the film where he's playing a really likable, slightly eccentric, but I think that when you play likable dads, you can do it like Jeff Daniels, maybe, where there's no bells and whistles. It's just sort of like, I'm a likable man and I'm playing a dad, Whereas what Nicolas Cage is doing is he's adding a level of eccentricity to it, but it still feels like the sort of very naturalistic behaviour that any human being would any dad would do, right? But the bit that made me laugh was when she goes, "Oh, can you go into the cellar and get us?" And he goes, "Oh, I know just the wine." And it sounds like he's this expert wine hoarder. He goes into this beautiful wine cellar. He's got hundreds of bottles of wine, and it sounds like he's a real wine expert, like a real aficionado. But when you actually look at the wine, it all looks like they've bought it in bulk from a supermarket, and they've got like, there's like a row of reds that have all got the exact same label that looks like anything that you would buy for like $5.99 from any supermarket or from Threshers. It looks like he's just bulk buyed off Threshers. Do you know what I mean? None of it's got any dust on it. They all just look like brand new out of the shop. So I thought that was quite funny because that's either like a deliberate reference or it's the fact that it was a low budget production and the art department just filled it up with as many bottles of wine as they could get.
Well, they get... you get this element as well, like you're saying about him being like a likable dad. You get like this 3D element as well, that he's got this like past, not that he's done anything dark, but like he's got this fraught relationship with his like deceased father, and like he kind of like doesn't want to be like him, and there's like that exchange, which is a beautiful exchange of him and Jolie Richardson on the like porch where they're kind of like being like really loving to each other, and he's talking about Yeah. And it's like, you get like great moments of humor where like, what is it he says to her? She's like, would you love me if I had no legs? And he says like, I would carry you on an airplane as hand luggage, and I could have my way with you whenever I wanted, which is like a frankly quite bizarre like image, but at the same time in this like Lovecraftian world, quite romantic.
It's the sort of thing that people really do say to
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, if it's a public joke, then you've got to be really careful about stuff like that. But it's a private joke. It gives it this extra level of sort of intimacy, which I just thought worked really well. I also thought the other thing that they do really well in this film was exposition. They would give you information with sort of like a line of dialogue here and there, and it never felt like you'd learn something about the characters, but it never felt heavy-handed. And it never felt like, especially right near the beginning of the film, you'd find out bits of information about the characters. And I just thought that was handled really well. I thought the script was great. I thought the acting was great. I thought it looked beautiful. The visuals were amazing. I thought Nicolas Cage was. I thought he was brilliant in it. I always get. I don't think it's necessarily career best, but I think that it's in the top end. Where, you know, I think every time he turns up for work, when he's actually invested in the film, I think it's possible for people to just say, "Oh, it's a career best." I think it's a joint best performance with maybe like a handful of others. He's really good in it, and I always feel like really weirdly proud when my favourite, you know, when sort of like Adam Sandler turns up and he does a good thing, and you go, "Oh yeah, good," because you can. If you're a fan of someone, I don't think it's not. It's sort of unconditional love, but you can still differentiate between what's bad and what's good. You know, and with Nicolas Cage, it's sort of like I feel like this weird sort of level of pride when not only is the film good, but he's realised it's good and he's made an effort. It would be sad if he'd have done an all-time best Nicolas Cage film, an all-time best Nicolas Cage performance in Left Behind. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's a terrible film and it would have been wasted on it. But he knows when he's onto something good, and that's what he illustrates in this film. He's really great in it. It's a good film.
Well, and it looks like looking forward in his career, there's a movie I know that's supposed to be coming out this year, and I think it's like one of the last films that finished production before like the coronavirus, is a film called Willy's Wonderland, which from kind of I know you're a massive Evil Dead fan, especially Army of Darkness, right? So he's in the film Willy's Wonderland, where he plays a silent janitor who is a janitor of an amusement park, and the animatronics come to life because they're like possessed by demons in kind of a Five Nights at Freddy's like style horror comedy, very much leaning towards horror. And Nicolas Cage plays this silent guy who has to kind of come on in this almost like video game-esque battle against these animatronics, which I feel could be finishing off this kind of weird spiritual sequels of, or like trilogy of Mandy.
Trilogy.
Yeah, Matt, do you know what I mean? Kind of playing these art house, especially now in this kind of like, he's leaning very much into the horror genre and kind of found his niche in the way that Keanu Reeves is just going to dine out on John Wick for as long as it's like viable for him to do. Like this could be Nicolas Cage's like kind of niche for the next 10 years or however long he really wants to kind of stay on this path.
What Keanu Reeves really needs to do is he needs to get another trilogy of so he's done The Matrix and he's done John Wick, and so he sort of like needs another trilogy where he's got a trilogy of trilogies. But like Nicolas Cage is, it depends what's it called? Willy's Wonderworld?
Willy's Wonderland, yeah.
Well, it should have been called World. Willy's Wonderland. It depends what the tone is, and is it an art house film or is it?
I'm not sure because obviously it's not out. All I've seen is like visuals from it. You can kind of see the poster again. If I'm going just off the poster again, which you can see on IMDb, straight away, this is what like kind of gives me the idea that this very much fits into that wheelhouse is the color scheme. So we kind of see this like scrawled writing that says, it says Wally's Wonderland, which is like, it's, which is a weird thing. Like it's now been retitled to Willy's Wonderland. But,
wow, the poster looks incredible.
Exactly. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah. Like,
because I mean, being a Bruce Campbell fan, you are set up for disappointment quite a lot. Where they're going to make a film called My Name Is Bruce, where Bruce Campbell has to fight actual spirits, and then you watch it, and it's like, oh no. Oh, I waited 3 years for this. You know, or you get like Man with the Screaming Brain. Bruce Campbell's going to be in a film called Man with the Screaming Brain where his brain gets replaced by another brain and he's got to fight his brain. Oh, no. And then you get something like Bubba Hotep where you go, oh, well, Bubba Hotep is so good. If only it had a bit more budget to really sort of like achieve what it wanted to. You know, so Wally's Wonderland, that does look incredible, actually. It's his magenta trilogy, then.
Yes. The three colours magenta, I think, will be the box set you'll be able to buy. Well, perfect. Yeah, we kind of. It's a weird one. Like, is there any moments else that really jumped out to you in Colour Out of Space before we wrap things up, Nick?
Just that when I watched the documentary. When I watched sort of like behind the scenes stuff, I think that there's a Blu-ray that's coming out which includes the short story as well.
Oh, amazing!
As like a booklet. But they tried to do as much stuff practically as possible. I thought that the insect looked really good in a few shots and not so good in a couple of other shots. I thought the bit when, oh my gosh, she turns into that. You only see it for a shot, but I would say that was just really, it fucked me up. I just thought it was absolutely fucking horrific. And there are a couple of really nice moments in it. Most of the special effects were practical, which I really loved.
Well, there's that moment of like, oh, you go.
Go on.
The moment with the alpacas, like we kind of get this, like, I guess would have been animatronics when they're all fused together. Again, like
that's the bit I was going to mention.
Yeah.
That's a miniature. That's a tiny little puppet.
Oh, amazing!
And so a lot of the stuff is kind of like full scale, and then stuff like the alpacas when they're all merged together was kind of like this sort of like table-sized puppet that they had, and it was miniatures. But there's some really good bits in it. And as I say, I would say I really enjoyed it as a film. I loved it. I felt a bit confused by it. Which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I like films where you have to go away and sort of like either watch them again or work them out. That don't. I also like films that just give it you on a plate, but I like sometimes watching films that you have to do a little bit of digging around and homework on, and this is sort of good for that. And I think it probably lives up to multiple viewings. It's a really great Nicolas Cage performance, but I think everyone is good in it. I think the kids are all really good in it. And I would just say that maybe the pacing was a bit off, but I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Or maybe I didn't love it, but I did really enjoy it.
Well, it's quite refreshing I don't know, the way horror's gone. Obviously, this is in amongst the kind of like Ari Aster, Robert Eggers like stuff. And it kind of like does something different to that because all that stuff's kind of like folk horror and stuff like that. For me, it's really nice to see just like a kind of sci-fi and very much like body horror is something that like just makes my skin crawl. Like there are moments in this, like that finger, like when she cuts off her fingers, you can see something coming off, like coming a mile off, and you're like, don't happen. Or like there's moments when they're walking in the barn and you can kind of hear these distant groans of the alpacas, like when the two sons go in, and it's fucking terrifying. And I'm like, I'm always dubious to drink tap water since watching this film, which is like, I don't, for something to have an effect on me like that, it's like, well, that's great. Like, even if it's not the best film in the world, it's nice to kind of be here a day later and go, do you know what? That's still living with me. It's not like a lot of films. You kind of watch them, and within a half hour, you're like, what was that film I just watched? Like, I don't.
Yeah.
So,
but also with stuff like The Witch and The Lighthouse and this, I was talking to I do a radio show, and I was talking to my producer. She was talking about John Travolta, and she was like saying, well, what's really happened with John Travolta? And you know, the same thing that's happened with John Travolta has happened to a lot of stars. It's happened to, you know, Bruce Willis and Nicolas Cage and Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And basically, the thing that's happened is that there really aren't any movie stars anymore. What you've got is you've got franchises where you've got to attach yourself to a franchise. You know, someone like Chris Hemsworth, he's a huge star when he's Thor. But when he goes off to make something else, it's kind of more of a gamble, you know? And so it's all about franchises now. Whereas when Nicolas Cage was huge in the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, it was about not only star-led vehicles, but it was about mid-budget vehicles. So you would be able to make an $80 million film starring Nicolas Cage, and it would be a huge release. But then you could also release a Terminator movie that cost $200 million, you know? But what you have now is you either have films that cost 10 million, or you have films that cost 200 million, 300 million, right? And you don't really have anywhere in between. You've either got a Star Wars film, or a Marvel film, or a DC film, you know, a franchise film, or you have these tiny little films like Color Out of Space, Mandy, you know, The Witch, and The Lighthouse, and you have these, and those four films are really interesting, kind of little psychological. And I hadn't really lumped them together until you just mentioned it. But you have those like psychological sort of low budget thrillers that really don't get made. So when you have someone like Nicolas Cage shining a light on it, or Willem Dafoe kind of taking part in one of those films, it kind of like it really gives them a chance to sort of be seen. And I think these films are really great, but what's really sad about it is that there are so many careers that they're not going to make films anymore, really, of maybe any real substance, or that aren't deeply compromised, because they just don't really make many, if any, mid-level budget movies. So it's either incredibly low budget, which this was, or incredibly huge budget. You know, even like Sylvester Stallone was in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, you know, because everyone knows the future is franchises.
Yeah. Well, there's there's the thing that, like, with some of those actors, it would be nice to see them kind of put ego, or if it's that, to side, and take on some of the roles in these lower budget films. I'm not sure if it's a thing of them not wanting to do it because they feel like they deserve more, like, and you mentioned Willem Dafoe, which, like, I love Willem Dafoe, and I very much see him as like one of Nicolas Cage's contemporaries, in the fact that they are both out there to just kind of roll the dice on any given project. And like there's some Willem Dafoe movies that, like, do you know what I mean? You got to hold your nose and go into them, but then like he pops up in stuff that is like great, and it's like that kind of crossover when they were both in Wild at Heart. Yeah, and like, do you know what I mean? Like Willem Dafoe and that, and then again in 2016, like they both did Dog Eat Dog, the Paul Schrader movie, which, like, Nicolas Cage, again, just to get that film made, he gave up some of his pay so Willem Dafoe could get paid, which shows again that he has a true love for making films, and it's not just about like his like icons are your Bela Lugosi's and kind of your Karloffs and stuff like that. He loves, and like Vincent Price, and like I think Nicolas Cage, if he carries on the way he's going, is gonna become like a kind of
That's all my pictures of Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Boris Karloff, and Peter Cushing.
Nicolas Cage will go that kind of like Vincent Price route if he kind of like tiptoes down this avenue of like horror as well, and like, I don't know, massively inspired by like German expressionism filmmaking, and just like is again just wants to roll the dice on all these interesting projects that a lot of these other actors, like, I don't know, like, I think from listening to Kevin Smith talk about the run-ins he had with Bruce Willis, like, I think there is a case of he won't take a punt on these lower budget movies. Or
but he's doing DT, he's doing direct to video, isn't he?
Yes.
And he can barely be bothered to make a Die Hard movie, let alone, do you know what I mean? The last Die Hard film was fucking atrocious, and it's kind of like, your name is all over this. This is your franchise, and you've got no love for it, and it's sort of crazy. Whereas if you look at when Arnold Schwarzenegger came back, he tried to make like the big budget stuff, and it's kind of like, well, there's not really a market for it. So then he made that film Maggie?
Yes.
Yeah, Maggie, the one about his daughter being a zombie, which was sort of like his low budget sort of Nicolas Cage movie in a way. I mean, he doesn't have the same instincts to sort of elevate the material. So he was good in it, but he wasn't like, fucking hell, you got to see this Schwarzenegger performance. It wasn't sort of crazy. He was playing it so downbeat. But I mean, he tried to make like this interesting film. The thing is, right, when you look at these films and you look at Bruce Willis and what he's doing, I think, and you look at something like Nicolas Cage in Knowing, right? That's the one that's the end of the world, right?
Knowing, yes, Knowing is the end of the world. Yeah, I always get that and Next.
And the other one is Next.
Yes.
Yeah, I get them confused.
Yeah.
But Knowing is the end of the world, right? And you can do that as a big budget movie, or you can kind of like, you can do National Treasure as this big budget movie. But you try and do a film like that on a tiny budget, right? You can't do it. You try and make a Die Hard film on a tiny budget. They have done it, but it ends up being Skyscraper starring Anna Nicole Smith, right? It's kind of like these films. It's almost impossible to downscale an action movie and give you the bang for your bucks that you expect from an action movie without it feeling deeply compromised. Whereas you can make a $10 million horror movie and stick Nicolas Cage in it, and you can still be inventive, and you can still be creative, and you can still put, I think, which is why, also, when you have all the money in the world to do it, you start adding CGI where you don't need it, and it all undoes. And I think horror is basically, it's a perfect genre for low budgets. But then they like franchise it all out, and then you have The Conjuring 3 and Annabelle and what's the other one that they're doing? The Nun. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like they're sort of like, they're too big budget. They end up not really becoming that scary, I think. Whereas something like this, when you have to use your imagination and play with concepts, and things are genuinely creepy and confusing, and you have to use your brain to work it out. And then it's like coupled with the fact that the actors want to be there because the script is good. They're going to turn in a good performance. So there are all these elements working in its favour by having like this low budget sort of Nicolas Cage science fiction horror movie, which isn't as fun as you think it's going to be. It's kind of like bleak.
Yeah, and like this could very much be coupled with like a very weird double bill of this and Hereditary. Not only are they kind of like about this family going mad, like, do you know what I mean, like isolated within their house, they're brought together as well by both of them. Fantastic scores by Colin Stetson, like the score to Colour Out of Space. Like, I've been listening to it this morning before recording, and it's just, I don't know, it's weird. It's kind of like and it has these moments that swell, and there's like certain, like, I think it's when like shit really hits the fan at the end, when you kind of get this glimpse of the like other world where this like these aliens come from, and like it feels like someone's sitting on your fucking chest, like, and that's kind of like the visuals coupled with like the music together, and just kind of like the foreboding tenseness that the movie up until that point has created, and you kind of get this release, and it's like, well, this isn't a pleasant release where I'm like, do you know what I mean, like a lot like a laugh like after a punchline and a joke. This is like, no, this is getting tighter on my chest, and I feel like, and then you're kind of, the film ends and you're like, I I don't know, I want to sigh, I want to kind of exhale of breath, but I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I've just watched, and like this is going to stay with me.
But it is an entertaining film. I mean,
There
are laughs to be had.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. All of that goes out the window about half an hour before the end. But what was that? What's the Marlon Brando movie they're watching?
I'm not sure, because that's an interesting one, because the last movie that Richard Stanley was like directed for years
was Marlon Brando.
Yeah, in The Island of Dr. Moreau, which like again has a fascinating, like, that could be a whole podcast series on that movie.
That is one of the best documentaries. Lost Souls, the making of Richard Stanley's Islands of Dr. Moreau. It's got to be one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. It's got everything that you would want out of a piece of fiction. It's got like good guys and bad guys and twists and suspense, and it's got everything in that film. It's such an incredible film. So Richard Stanley was making The Island of Dr. Moreau, and then it got overtaken. I was just watch Lost Souls, basically. The only film that I'd seen of his apart from that, I think I saw Dust Devil. I don't think I've even seen Hardware. I think I saw Dust Devil a while ago. Yeah, that's got to be an in-joke, right? When they put on her favourite film and it's a Marlon Brando film.
Yeah, that Marlon Brando film is... I don't know. It just says a Marlon Brando. I'm on IMDb trivia now. It just says a Marlon Brando film is playing on the TV. So, but yeah, it must be. And there's a reference to Hardware on the wall of the son Benny's room. There's like a quote from Hardware, which is saw it a moment ago. No flesh will be spared, which is like a quote from that movie, is on the Stoner Kids wall. So like, it's nice that like, I don't know, Richard Stanley, from listening to in interviews, has this like weird sense of humor. And there's a story about a short that he made before Color Out of Space, which he used a Ouija board to come up with the idea, and the Ouija board has writing credits for this short film that he made, which is called it's called Mother of Toads, which is this short film which him and a friend bought a Ouija board from Toys R Us while he's living in the Pyrenees, and used the Ouija board to write an outline of this short film. And then within like 24 hours, it was getting funded and being made. And I'm not sure if that story is just Richard Stanley having fun with interviewers and going, this is what I came up with. But at the same time, the area he lives in, like, people would come to visit him. And he said in interviews, like, oh, this feels very like Lovecraftian, like where you're living. And it's like he has taken this kind of obsession with Lovecraft that he's had like since a child. He said his mum used to read him Lovecraft as a child, like, which is like,
and this was his favourite story. This was his favourite one.
Yeah. So like, and
it's about the end of the it's about a family getting destroyed by a fucking out of space fucking alien that lands on a fucking meteorite. It's just fucking, oh my God. And it's your favourite fucking story growing up. It's so bleak. It's fucking, this is my favourite child bedtime story. It's so bleak. But, yeah, and also, but having that quote, what's the quote from Hardware?
No flesh will be spared.
Because that fits right in with this film, and it's almost like him saying his career, it's almost him saying, I've always been about Lovecraft. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like he's saying that this quote, I can put up it as a set decoration on an H.P. Lovecraft film, and it comes from one of my first films, Hardware. And it's his career like coming full circle. You know, it's worth pointing out that H.P. Lovecraft was a massive racist and horrific human being.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, this is the. Sometimes looking back on a lot of these films, there's directors that like now and producers that have produced a lot of Nic Cage's films that like with a modern perspective. Well, I think even at the time, H.P. Lovecraft was a piece of shit. He seemed like a very difficult man as well in regards to a lot of things. But yeah, massively racist and a massive. But we're not here to applaud H.P. Lovecraft. We are here to applaud Nicolas Cage for, fingers crossed, because that will be my podcast down the pan, is a decent human being. So before I let you go, Nick, there's 3 questions I always ask at the end, and they are as follows. In this movie, does Nic Cage have bad hair?
It's not good. It's odd. I think for Nicolas Cage, it's quite good. He's sort of got it shaved around the sides and it's long up top.
But again, it's talked about in the film. So even when it's moments of bad hair, it's like you said about Season of the Witch. It's a character choice. There is a choice made, and like when he looks like kind of dishevelled when he's doing that like TV interview, his hair looks like absolute shit, doesn't he? He looks.
They do mention his hair.
Yeah,
they do mention his hair in the film, but also it is sort of like I think the film is Next.
Yeah,
where he plays the magician. He has a similar sort of hairdo in that. So it's that sort of haircut. I think it's all right, but they do mention it, so I haven't got a problem with it.
Perfect. Does he have a crazy voice? Obviously, he's known for kind of going to these places and pulling out these voices.
It gets crazy. It gets really crazy. Like he starts dipping into this sort of Californian dude pastiche thing later on in the film, which sort of comes out of nowhere. It feels like an early Nicolas Cage decision, but like really early.
Well, we get this kind of weird duality at times in this film where, like, when he does that voice, he's kind of quite angry, but then, like, in the next scene, he'll be kind of, like, back to his normal voice, kind of being very attentive to his family. And, like, I think he does that voice where he's like, go feed your mother. Like, he kind of shoves her into the attic. And, like, he's got some amazing, like, quotes in this film. Like,
one-liners.
Yeah, one-liners. I think they're, like, one I picked up on really early is, time for you to do the dishes. He kind of like does it in this kind of like Mr. Rogers real happy dad voice, and then
but that's the thing, that's a character choice. That's like, and I think that what that does, those are one of the standout moments where you kind of like, he also says that there's another bit where he comes in and he's trying to get the car working, and he comes in and he goes, the car is not happening, and then the daughter goes, what do you mean the car is not happening? And that feels like a Nicolas Cage improvisation. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who would write that as a bit of dialogue. I don't know, especially because it wasn't written with Nicolas Cage in mind. I think that that's the sort of thing that would come where he would go, the car's not working or the car's not starting, and then Nicolas Cage just comes in and he finds like an interesting spin on how to give that like mundane bit of information.
Well, yeah,
and then the daughter is kind of like going, well, what do I say now? And then you go, well, what do you mean? And I think that's the sort of thing that was probably worked out on set. And just like the bit when he tells him to do the dishes, he finds a really upbeat, fun but believable dad way of doing it, and you go, I love this film. He makes the character like, that's an example of sometimes Nicolas Cage can absolutely drag you out of a film and you go, well, he's in a different film to everyone else.
And
then this is an example of him using his eccentric tics to sort of like just create a really believable three-dimensional character.
Exactly, It's really interesting you're saying about that, something that would come up on set. I've spoken to a couple of like writers and directors who have worked with Nicolas Cage, and they have said like he always asks for, his only stipulation is, can I just have one take for me? Like, and that 9 times out of 10 is what ends up on screen. They go with that because he's like kind of, and he'll come to table reads. I spoke to the director of Mum and Dad, Brian Taylor, and he said like he came to the table reads for that and he knew everything. He knew his monologue. He like delivers. I'm not sure if you remember that like scene where he's like he destroys the pool table and has this kind of like breakdown monologue, kind of like talking about how his life is like not what he envisioned when he was younger, and it's all gone to shit, and just kind of like this thing of despair of, I guess, I don't know, people feel when they kind of get into a loveless marriage, and you had this all these ideas to be evil Knievel, and now you're do you know what I mean, a soccer dad like with 2 kids in this kind of suburban life. And he said he came to the table read before anyone like had kind of was just going, and he knew it all off by heart, and he was like he knew other people's lines, and it's like he will do that for a small budget movie, like do you know what I mean, like Mum and Dad's not the biggest budget in the world, and it's like he fucking cares, and that's what's great about him.
Who was the mum in that?
That was Selma Blair.
Selma Blair. That's a weird team up, right?
Yeah. Well, there's like
he's not nearly old enough.
Well, that I think that's a Hollywood like foible, isn't it? That there's a lot of old men with very young wives in movies.
Sure, but like Famke Janssen would have been perfect for something like that, right? Or even Nicole Kidman. Well, I don't know. that is absolutely mind-boggling to me that Nicole Kidman and him were in a was that the Joel Schumacher film?
Yeah.
That's mind-boggling because she's been consistently near the top of her game. Why would she need to make that film?
Well, I guess when you look at like if Joel Schumacher, you kind of go, "Oh, all right." Like, well, no. I'm saying, yeah, maybe.
I think you got like he has made like a stretch of good films.
Yeah, he made 8mm was interesting. Like maybe not the best.
Oh yeah, of course he'd already worked with him on 8mm. It's kind of like getting the old team back together again, right? Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
But yeah, if you look at Nicole Kidman's career around that time, it's not like she was kind of like, I don't know, out on the skids or anything like that. She was kind of doing like consistent, interesting work, whether it was like The Paperboy or again low budget but still very interesting.
Maybe this was like a real paycheck then.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I could kind of see something in that, like there is interesting players in it. As I mentioned earlier, like you got Ben Mendelsohn, who was kind of like on the rise at the time, who's like a fantastic, like great actor and a lot of stuff he turns up in. But like the script, right? The script is terrible. Like
if that's all you're going on is the script from this film, what's it called again? Trespass.
Yeah.
There's already been like 3 other films called Trespass as well. They're all better than this film. But it's like, if you're basing it on the script alone, you go, who else is doing it? And then you go, well, it's got an amazing cast, and it's got, a sort of off his game, but previously great director.
Mm-hmm.
Then I guess you might do it, but you've still got to base it on the script, which is fucking awful. What a terrible film. Am I on Nicole Kidman? Yeah, I am. So where was Trespass? Trespass, right? 2011. Yeah. Oh my God. So she followed up the Adam Sandler movie Just Go With It with Trespass.
Oh wow.
And then she did The Paperboy, which no one's watched. Stoker was great. And she came off the Golden. Oh right, yeah, right. Oh my God. Yeah, right. Okay. So she did The Interpreter. Oh my God. Oh my God. So Cold Mountain was a hit. You got to go back quite a while.
Yeah.
Cold Mountain was a hit. Stepford Wives was not a hit. Birth was not a hit. The Interpreter was not a hit. Bewitched was a flop. The Invasion was a disaster. Margot at the Wedding, indie film. Golden Compass, flop. Australia, flop. 9. I can't remember how that was. I don't think people like that. Rabbit Hole, depressing, indie. Just Go With It, Adam Sandler. Then she does Trespass. I mean, she hasn't made like a bona fide
banger.
I can see
Yeah.
this. I think Stoker is absolutely incredible. I love Nicole Kidman, but I'm surprised by seeing that stretch of films, really.
So I guess that kind of makes sense of why she maybe did Trespass, in that it was, I don't know, kind of fail after fail. And I think Golden Compass is a really interesting one because, like you were mentioning earlier, like this whole franchise culture that I guess around 2007 would have, they would have very much been hoping for it after like the hits of the Harry Potter franchise and Lord of the Rings, and obviously like based on the Philip Pullman books, were hoping it was going to be gold and turned out to be like a steaming pile of shit. Like,
it was the best of both worlds, wasn't it? It was Lord of the Rings epic stuff meets sort of magical fantasy of Harry Potter, and it's based on a kid's book. Let's put them together, and but I don't think I saw it, but I didn't really know the source material, but I don't know. That's what an interesting career, though. That's Nicole Kidman. Anyway, Nicolas Cage.
Perfect. So, but yeah, one last question before we do the regular wrap up of what you're up to is, as somebody who I think it's fair to say has used anger very much in his career, like very similar to Nicolas Cage. Do you ever feel that like that is, I don't know, has that ever like, have you ever felt pigeonholed by that in that thing of like, obviously you're like a lot of people, I spoke to my brother and I said, I'm speaking to Nick Helm in a few days. And he was like, oh, is he the angry guy? I think he's going off solely your appearance on 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown. But yeah, I don't know how, like, and yeah, it brings me on to the final question of like, do we get a Cage freak out as a man who's delved and I think personally uses anger in a great way, like yourself. But yeah, do we get a classic Nick Cage freak out in this?
What, in this movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the second half of the film is like him constantly veering from one thing to the other. Basically, it's they set up his dad quite early on in the film. He has like what you said earlier, is that throwaway line about his dad, about how his dad was horrible, and he's basically spent the entire first half of the film making you fall in love with him as like the dad. You just go, this guy's great. He's likable, funny. He loves cooking for his family, even though he's not very good. But don't tell Dad, he's out the room. I think everyone watching this film, I mean, he reminded me of my dad, and I'm not a dad, but he's sort of like the sort of dad that you'd like to be. And he even makes the fact that no one likes doing the washing up, but you're doing the washing up, and he makes that into sort of like something fun. And then the second half of the film is basically him turning into his dad, and him sort of like flipping between the two. And yeah, it's a classic freak out. I wouldn't say I get pigeonholed as an angry man, but almost every part I've ever played has had some sort of level of substance abuse. And so you go, all right, so you can be the alcoholic, Nick, or you can be the ex-drug addict, or you can be, and I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, I can do other things. But that in terms of pigeonhole, that's what I get. But yeah, Nicolas Cage does do a proper but it's not like Mandy level. It's like grounded in. Mandy is sort of like a surreal performance, whereas this is sort of quite a grounded performance.
Well, yeah, we get that moment in the car, which like he just like loses his mind, but like is justified because like that's the thing. I think a lot of the time, from speaking earlier about these kind of sizzle reels of him like losing his shit, as like they say, in this it's justified in that like it is fucking like what he kind of comes back in and he's like, I don't know what is going on, like I don't understand what is going on anymore. So you can see that frustration when all they want to do is leave, and the car is like, and he kind of has this freak out where he just starts screaming in the car, and it's quite similar to that one in Mandy where he's like in his pants necking vodka in the bathroom.
Yeah, I just remembered the bit you mean. I thought you meant the bit when he's driving her back from the hospital, but you mean the bit when he's like smashing the car. Yeah, but then that's kind of like you're sort of like watching it going, oh, here he is. And in actual fact, it's definitely, it's come from a place that he has found emotionally honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think that if you're sort of an ironic fan, then those are the moments that you'll really love. But the moment I really loved was when he's just this really loving husband, and then he flips around and he says the thing about cancer, and he says, well, you'd know all about that. And she's like immediately hurt, and you go, that's so cruel, and it's completely out of character for what you know about that character up to that point. That I just thought moments like that were really effective, and he performs the fuck out of it, because it's so callous and cruel and mean, and you can see that it hurts her. And he's kind of like oblivious to it, and you just know at that point that he's basically possessed by another character, you know. And I think that that's a real subtle thing. You feel sort of hurt at the same time that he said it, but you're also aware that they're two different performances that he's pulling off there. He's pulling off the fact that he's this nice guy dad that we all love at the beginning of the film, and then you're pulling off the fact that his character completely changes. He does it really well. It's really subtle, and it's basically it's two performances in one. I think it's really good. Yeah. But then also when you talk about the sizzle reels, you look at something like The Wicker Man, which isn't a great film, but the most famous bit about that is the bees.
Yeah.
But they were CGI bees, right? So he was performing the fuck out of that scene. And they were CGI bees, right? So he's not responsible for the quality of the CGI not really selling that, right? I don't know. I just think... And when you look at one of his most exaggerated performances in Bad Lieutenant, that's also one of his best.
Yeah.
And contextually with the film, it works perfectly.
Well,
I think sometimes there's maybe his performance and the film don't quite line up, but his performance is huge, and Bad Lieutenant is huge, and you've also got Werner Herzog, who's basically encouraging him off camera to just go as mental as he possibly can, and so you've got like this perfect storm of a film, which is Bad Lieutenant, which I think is great.
Well, I like to think that like Nicolas Cage to Werner Herzog, he sees like an element of Klaus Kinski in him, in like he will go to these like crazy places in his performances and will go there. And Bad Lieutenant is very much up there. And I think like adds to the point that it's when Nicolas Cage works with interesting directors is when we kind of and know how to like harness that kind of energy, that nouveau shamanic like style of acting that Nicolas Cage has that can ramp up to 11, but in a film like Colour Out of Space or Mandy or Bad Lieutenant, they are justified and they are within the realms of the film instead of just being cheap and like throwaway for that kind of sizzle reel culture of just like, let's all laugh at Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, I think it's ironic, but just to make one final point is that when you look at Con Air, which I would say is one of my favourite films, when you look at his performance in Con Air, he is surrounded by people losing their shit in that film.
Yeah,
you know, Cole Meany is losing his shit, John Malkovich, Ving Rhames, Steve Buscemi, even John Cusack. You know, everyone is going big for that. And he, except for his massive accent that he's putting on, he's the calm one in that film.
Yeah,
you know. And I think it's an incredible performance. I think one of the things that people don't understand about Con Air is that it's a mega budget violent comedy, right?
Yeah.
People just take it at face value, but it's basically it's this huge piece of economic storytelling where I always say that Suicide Squad was such a mess. You know, they introduced Will Smith 3 times at the beginning of Suicide Squad, and they spend 45 minutes introducing all of the characters, and then they don't introduce one character, and then he comes on and he gets killed instantly, and it's just it's a shit show, right? And you look at Con Air, they introduce all of those guys through narration as they get off a bus and onto a plane, and he's literally just John Cusack is just telling the audience who that bad guy is, why he's bad, why he's dangerous, and now he's on the plane. And they do that for like 5 minutes at the beginning of the film. You don't need any more setup. And then you just enjoy watching these performances for the rest of the film. That's what Suicide Squad should have done.
Yeah.
And they just fucked it. You know? I just think that I think it's a really deliberately funny film, and I think people are really snarky when they look at Con Air, and they're just like, "Oh my god," the bit when he jumps through the door and then there's the explosion behind him. Oh my god, and he's just like, "That's deliberate. It's hilarious. They know exactly what they're doing. It's really funny. Fucking Dave Chappelle's in it. They know what they're doing."
What?
The hero of the film is fucking Steve Buscemi, who gets away with it at the end, and he's basically Hannibal Lecter. He's like a child murdering Hannibal Lecter, right? There's a whole sequence in the middle of Con Air where you think that Steve Buscemi is going to kill a kid, right? In the middle of this fun action movie, there's this really tense scene where you think he's going to kill a kid, and then you find out he doesn't kill a kid, and then you find out that he's the only one that's got away with everything. He's free, and he's basically your favorite character in the whole film. And it's an action movie where they've made your favourite character in the whole film a child-murdering Hannibal Lecter type psychopath, and you're happy he gets away at the end. And it's just kind of like, it's a comedy. It's a really fun, entertaining movie, and it's a really unusual Nicolas Cage performance because he's completely reined in that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that kind of, it's the perfect synergy of a perfect elevator pitch of an idea. Do you know what I mean? Have all these convicts on a plane, and it's just a roller coaster ride of a movie. It just kind of like, as you said, it sets it up, it gets going, and doesn't fucking stop to the end. And to your point of it being a comedy, like, one of the biggest quotable lines from that movie is, "Put that bunny back in the box." How is that not a comedy line? Do you know what I mean? Like,
they have a life and death. They have a life and death fight over a toy rabbit, and people are watching it at face value. And like at the end of the fight, he goes, "Why couldn't you put the bunny back in the box?" And you go, and he's basically doing a Forrest Gump impression, right? And it's just kind of like, you're going, like, and people are taking it at face value, going, "Oh my god, it's so stupid. They had a fight over a rabbit," and you go, "Yeah, you've got the joke. Why can't you see the joke? Why can't you? Why? Do you know what I mean? Why can't you just allow the film to own its own jokes? It's brilliant. It's funny. It's great."
Well, there's a lovely reference to Con Air in Stolen, the film that's directed by the same director of Con Air, where Nicolas Cage's character comes straight out of prison and he's going to his young daughter, and the first thing he gets from like a newsagent is a stuffed toy of a bunny. And like, for me, as somebody who's like immersed myself in this world, I was like, yes, that is for the nerds like me who are at home going like, "Oh, I know it's the same director, nobody else is going to pick up on this, but that is something for us." So yeah,
I think I've seen Stolen. I'm not sure.
If you haven't, I would wholeheartedly recommend it. It is a film, and like I've said it on the podcast, gave me the like thing of, you should never judge like a film by its cover, because the cover for Stolen is fucking shit. But like, it's a great movie, and like another one where Cage plays a very restrained role, and like his co-star in it gets like his nemesis in it gets this Cage-like performance of just like wildness. It very much it's got like a kind of Die Hard with a Vengeance like feel to it. It's kind of got that fun Ocean's 11 like aspects to it, because Nicolas Cage plays this con man who like is kind of a few steps ahead of everyone, and it's in that kind of like sea of shit that you can get lost in the early 2010s. That is one that I personally will hold up, and that's the hill I will die on. Do you know what I mean? That's the
cool.
So
yeah. My second cousin is Simon West.
Oh,
but I've never met him. His side of the family doesn't talk to our side of the family, or something weird. But it's this thing. I was at a family reunion about 20 years ago, and they said, "Oh, well, Simon West is your second cousin." I was doing a film. I wasn't doing a film degree, but I was studying film at university, and I was just like, my second cousin directed Con Air. And they were like, yeah. And I go, and we're not talking to them. I was so gutted. He did Expendables. Did he do Expendables 2? He did Expendables 2 as well. Yeah,
which again, there's like going back to like you said it throughout this, and so have I, that Cage is a man who makes like choices on what he does. He turned down a role in Expendables 3 to do the movie Joe, like, which just shows that like it's not about the big bucks for him. Because
what part was he up for?
In Expendables 3, I guess I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it would have been a villainous character or just a kind of throwaway kind of cameo, like a lot of those guys have, or he would have been a new member of the team. I'm not really sure. He was offered a role anyway.
I think that it's either the sort of thing they would have written for him, or it would have been the bad guy, and then they rewrote. Because I think that it's a bit ballsy to go with Mel Gibson. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To go, we want Mel Gibson to be the main bad guy in our film, and we're going to make him like into a proper bad guy. And it's like Mel Gibson going, yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm going to get killed by Sylvester Stallone and Dolph Lundgren and Wesley Snipes on camera now because everyone hates me. I guess that's what I'm going to do. Whereas I think it's a weird move, but I think Nicolas Cage would have either been a really good bad guy, or yeah, they would have written a part for him. Expendables 3 is the best Expendables film, by the way. All right, thank you very much. Good night.
Perfect. Well, I've taken up way too much of your time already, Nick. Where can people keep up to date with what you're doing? Obviously, at the moment, very much the live comedy scene is on like taking a break, like, which yeah.
Well, if people like talking about films or listening to people talk about films, I do a radio show on Fubar Radio every Friday 12 till 2, which turns into a podcast. So if you follow me on Twitter, which is @TheNickHelm, then I always like post a link to that every like Monday when it comes out as a podcast. So that's good. That's me and my mate talking about my mate Nathaniel Metcalf talking about films every week and other stuff. Basically, they already had 2 film podcasts on that radio station, and so we lied and said, "Oh, we'll just talk about stuff that we like, but the only things that we like are film." And we basically we got to that, and then yeah, what else? I'm writing a new album at the moment, so that'll come out at some point soon. Oh, and my live show, All Killer Some Filler, is available from gofasterstripe.com.
Which, as somebody watched it just this morning, I would recommend it wholeheartedly. I guess it's
good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really fun, and it's really it's hard to explain, especially obviously with you right here. Without like, I will say in the intro, like how good it is, kind of, and stuff like that. But like, it's fun. Like, it's just real entertainment. Like, which is like what I love. What I've always loved about like what you've always done. It's just this kind of thing. Like it's, I don't know. It's. You can see your influences. You can see what you love, like through music and stuff like that. And it's a great show, and it looks fucking great as well. Like,
yeah, it looks amazing. I mean, so we recorded it 4 years ago, and basically I was so disappointed with how it went on the night that it took me 4 years to even watch it. And because of lockdown, the guy that recorded it all, he's been literally pestering me for like 4 years saying, just watch it, Nick, because it's not as bad as you think it is. And then I watched it, and I was just like, it's not only is it's like one of the best things, because you know, I think one of the things that makes it good is that there are loads of things that go wrong on the night, and there's mistakes, and I like fluff my lines in places, and there's some arseholes in the audience, and there's a power cut on stage. There's all of these really like things that go wrong on the night. So it's not like it's a really slick show, but because we've left all of that stuff in, it feels like an actual night out. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. which I think
so it doesn't feel like a show that we refined and we performed it 70 times and then we recorded it. It feels like you've gone out for a night out and this is what it was.
That is very much what people at the moment of recording this desperately need, is that feeling of like community and being out and just having a fun time, which is exactly how I would describe All Killer Some Filler. Amazing, Nick. Well, thank you so much for your time and thank you for being on the podcast. It's been an absolute treat, absolute ride.
Yeah, I could have talked about Nicolas Cage for another 2 hours. Thank you very much.
Once again, a massive thank you to Nick Helm for coming and raging and with Cage with me, and a very much thank you to you guys for listening. If you feel differently to myself and Nick about this film, don't hesitate to get in touch, which you can do via email, which is cagedinpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on all the socials, which is cagedin@cagedinpod on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. As a recommendation for this episode, you can always go back and listen to my conversation with effects artist Dan Martin, which will be a part of the Caged In Conversation series. And I spoke to Dan about his work on the film Possessor, Human Centipede, and this very film. I will drop that in the show notes, and if you follow on socials, I'm sure I'll put it in a thread with all of the links to this episode as well. Because, yeah, it's really fascinating. Dan kind of talks about how they created the creatures and the stuff that's digital and the stuff that's practical effects in this film. Such a fun conversation, and such a lovely guy, Dan Martin. If you don't listen to the Arrow video podcast, he's one of the hosts, and that's a fantastic podcast. As for next week, I will be joined by Ben Davies of the Film Floggers podcast to talk about the 2020 Dimitri Logothetis action drama sci-fi jiu-jitsu. Do be sure to come back and listen to that one, because we have a lot to say. If you want to support the podcast, please do so by heading over to Apple Podcasts, giving us a 5-star rating and review, or any podcast platform for that matter, if it has a rating and review system. Or tell a friend. Tell people, like, if they enjoy Nicolas Cage film, if they enjoy a specific film, go, hey, check out this podcast. You might like it. Or you can always support this podcast financially over on Patreon, which is patreon.com/cagedinpod. And you can also find me, I always forget to plug this, you can find me on Letterboxd, where you can find kind of first reactions to films and kind of get a glimpse of what the episode might be like, whether I'm going to be like, oh, bloody love that one, or if I'm going to be slagging it right off. So as always, guys, I've been Petros, I've been Caged In, you've been amazing, bye bye.